to Western thought?
Well, I would say that in layman's terms, a moral relativist is somebody who believes that a moral judgment is the expression of the subjective opinion of a particular person, and that it cannot be evaluated from any other position than his own. Mm-hmm. So every judgment is relative to the interests and position of the person who makes it. So that in the end, there is no position outside the individual from which he can be judged.
Right. So then maybe an older view of thinking or philosophy or of approaching life would have been an endeavor to discover truth, or something like that.
Yeah, obviously one contrast with this is the religious worldview, which says that there is a position outside the individual's interests, right, from which he is judged. That is the position occupied by God, who, as it were, provides that overview, systematic overview of all our desires and all our aims, and is in a position to judge us. We can then, by, as it were, discovering what his position is, come to an objective view of our own situation. Right. Obviously, the obvious thing to say about moral relativism is that it's what is left when the religious worldview collapses. And that's perhaps one reason why it is so prevalent now.
Right. Do you have to have, though, a religious worldview? Would an Aristotle have viewed it that way? Do you necessarily need to be religious to recognize that truth might exist and it would be worthwhile to discover what that is?
No, you don't. And of course, that has been one of the efforts of philosophy down the centuries. Aristotle is only one example. Kant is another. The effort to produce a fulcrum on which our worldview can turn, which is not simply our individual desires. And I think for a long time after the Enlightenment, Western intellectuals believed that they had discovered that in the idea of morality put forward by Kant, or perhaps some version that was downstream from that, like the utilitarianism of John Stuart Mill and so on, which gave a secular grounding to a shared moral position, right, which would not be the position of any particular person, but the position of all of us. And from that we could come to conclusions about what was right and wrong, which didn't privilege the individual and his desires. But of course, I think there's been an increasing, during the 20th century, an increasing despair that project was possible. Right. This despair had many forms, but one of the most important from the point of view of rhetoric was the existentialist position of people like Sartre. Sartre said, he argued that there is no position from which I can be judged except my own. So that the only thing that can authenticate my moral judgments is my choice that those are my judgments. Right. So the difference between a moral and an immoral person, on Sartre's view, is simply that the moral person is somebody who wills his own desires as commitments, whereas the immoral person is someone who just has those desires. So on that view, the authentic existentialist rapist is the one who you should praise, not the person who simply is tempted by his sexual appetites.
Right. So this subjective